Welcome to Event Experience by Bizzabo, the podcast where we bring the best and brightest event experience leaders together to share stories, tips, and lessons learned from creating some of the world's biggest events. I'm Rachel Moore, your podcast host. In this episode, you'll learn about the intersection of events and community building to drive business growth. Alon Alroy, co-founder and CMO of Bizzabo, and Sam Jacobs, CEO of Pavilion, chat openly about the importance of structure in event planning, the rise of smaller regional events, and the long-term benefits of community investment over immediate demand generation. If you've been wanting to host your own successful thought leadership dinners, keep listening for the experts' event experience. Hello, everyone. We're so glad you're here with us today. I'm Rachel Moore, and I'm the host of Bizzabo's Event Experience podcast, and I'm thrilled to be your moderator through today's discussion. Welcome to the key to accelerating growth, building community through events. In today's discussion, we're going to discover the combined potential of events and community to drive growth. Our goal is to give you a seat at a special discussion with two leaders in events and community, respectively, which will give you practical tips to understand the importance of community to both virtual and in-person events, to run micro events like dinners, to influence revenue for growing your brand or business, and to coordinate events and cultivate community hand in hand for success. We're going to talk about how running 1,000 dinners helped Pavilion build a 10,000 strong community-led profitable business. We're also going to reveal actionable insights, real-world examples, and expert advice on making events a cornerstone of your growth strategy. All right, without further ado, let's begin our journey. It's my pleasure to introduce today's speakers. First, we have Alon Alroy. Alon is the co-founder and chief marketing officer of Bizzabo. As a refresher, Bizzabo's event experience operating system enables marketing and event teams to manage and scale their program. Alon helped build Bizzabo's go-to-market teams since its founding in 2011, and his go-to event day shoes are either Vans sneakers or Cole Haans. Alon, welcome to the discussion today.
Thank you very much, Rachel. Super happy to be here.
Awesome. Next, we have Sam Jacobs. Sam is the founder and CEO of Pavilion, the world's #1 private community for GTM leaders. Since 2016, Sam has bootstrapped Pavilion to be a network of over 10,000 go-to-market professionals in B2B tech. Sam's favorite shoes to wear on a long day of networking and events are Nike Air Force Ones. Welcome, Sam, to the discussion.
Thank you, Rachel. Super excited to be here. Always like looking at my AI-generated avatar. He is incredibly handsome and unlike me in real life.
I gotta say, it's pretty. I like the detail too. That's probably one of the better ones I've ever seen. So
he looks like Indiana Jones. I love it.
Where's the hat? We're just missing the hat, the iconic hat. Well, let us get started, shall we? Before, though, we dive into our key topics, I'd like to ask our speakers today to answer the question from an organizational standpoint. What's the biggest takeaway you hope to provide from a micro event? Sam, I'll ask you first. What's your biggest takeaway you hope to provide?
I don't mean to give a fluffy answer, but I think the biggest takeaway is a deep sense of connectedness and community from the participants in the event. I think from there, new network connections, new business, certainly content, new insights, tactics they can apply in their daily life. But the foundation of it is a sense, it's an inimitable sense that you get from being in person of human connection and the energy that's created from a common group working on a common goal. Hard to describe, but you know when you feel it. And that's what fundamentally, that's what enables everything else for me.
Love it. Alon, how about you?
First, I agree 100%. I'll add that I think a memorable experience. To most people, it comes with creating new, meaningful connections. So I think it's a level above new network connections. We sometimes just make connections, but it's all about making deep, meaningful connections. And that can be done by organizers actually creating what Sam was talking about, this atmosphere of belonging and meaning.
Absolutely. Both great takeaways. I mean, I think we all want to get those things out of micro events. Let's see how our audience answered. looks like new network connections really won the day on this one. But I think that really ties into what both of you said. I mean, that's, meeting people and making those connections is a huge part of making memories and just really having those takeaways afterwards. So excellent. And of course, those other ones figured in too, but new network connections was the big one. I am interested to see how this plays out in our discussion as we go forward. First up, I'm going to do air quotes here, community. Okay. We've heard it. We know about it. We participate in it. I mean, right here, right now, we're forming a community as we gather together for this singular experience. And we may nebulously know that community is important to today's events, but today is about removing any ambiguity around that notion. So let's kick things off with some clarity. Sam, I'm going to take this first question to you. Again, I'm going to repeat the word community. In the context of community, how vital are events and why?
Events are critical because events, and it sort of depends what you mean, by the word of event, but let's say you mean a group of people coming together for a common purpose through a shared experience. Maybe that's one definition. And in that context, events are literally the way that you create the sense of community, the sense of belonging. They don't all have to be in person, but I can tell you, to the point of the intro, I run a global community of 10,000 people all over the world. And how did all of this start? You know how all of this started? The way that communities have started over the last million years, which is humans breaking bread around a table. And this all started from a quarterly dinner of people that had shared experiences, that is CROs and CMOs in New York City. And, we came together to talk about our lives, to talk about the challenges we faced, and to talk about the struggles that we were trying to overcome. And that commonality of similar people sharing an experience around a common set of values, that's what enabled and activated the community in the truest sense. So I think events and community are intertwined in a way that I probably didn't have a full appreciation for 10 years ago before I started working on Pavilion.
Alon, and I'd love to ask you that same question with community and events. And, it really does make sense too. I think, Sam, you talked about like back in history, that's kind of how people gathered, and also the history with Pavilion. But Alon, I'd love to ask you that question, like when it comes to community building, how vital are events to that effort?
I think when you reflect on platforms like Reddit and at the time, meetup.com, you see that there are definitely strong communities that are digital only. Having said that, the best and strongest communities out there are those that were activated or amplified through events. And I think it's not a surprise that some of the leading B2B brands out there that over the years became category leaders like HubSpot and Gainsight and so on, did that on the back of a very strong community that came to life through a large event and throughout a very powerful event program that gave that community a chance to meet in person. And then it's like 10xing the power of community. And as someone who's been following, honestly, Sam and Pavilion for a while, that is also, in my mind, kind of like the magic sauce of Pavilion becoming such a strong community because of all of these in-person moments. So people tend to think that having a Slack or a digital forum is a community. We have a community. I'm part of a community because I'm part of a Slack group. And yes, community is a broad term, but a true community, or at least I've never experienced a strong community that did not have strong in-person elements as part of it.
Yeah, and I would also, just to add to what Alon was just saying, I think there's a difference between an audience and a community. And an audience is, we can say that what's happening right now is a community, and, if we want to, we can. But really, it's me, Alon, and Rachel talking to a lot of people. Yes, there's a little bit of interaction. But community is what happens when the participants talk to each other. And when we don't need to be present in order to have that serendipity and the activation and that virality of people learning what the core values are and what the core ideas are, and then connecting and communicating with each other. And so, because I've seen many conference organizers say that they run communities, when really it's just a bunch of people coming to a conference and then dispersing without any shared sense of vision or values. So there's a lot of elements to it, but, I think that that's important important. What's the difference between, if we all listen to the same podcast, that doesn't make us a community unless we all get together and start connecting with each other as a mechanism. That was the inspiration from that podcast.
That's I appreciate you making that point too. Cause yeah, I admittedly, like right at the front, I'm like, hey, yeah, we're kind of a community right now. But you really did define that to say, well, wait a second, how can that be different? If it's an audience, and like you said, it's more of a spectator sport where we're just in our own little silos experiencing this separately, but it's when you get people to be able to interact with each other around, whatever's happening on this stage, or if it is a podcast or at a conference, that's when the actual community happens, right? It's about the audience saying, let me speak to the person next to me versus just experiencing it and not sharing that experience with someone else.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you too, and Alon, you listed out some really great examples of communities that have been strengthened with events coming into play. I mean, this is kind of not a rhetorical question, but based on what your answer was, can either of you think of any really successful business communities that weren't built or grown through events? I mean, are there any out there that have successfully done that when they haven't provided those events?
I think for B2B, I struggle. By the way, if you've read Behind the Cloud, Mark Benioff's, I don't know if it's his biography or autobiography, one of the two, but Dreamforce is a critical part of the Salesforce story. And from the beginning, Benioff was thinking about, how do I create a set of values? It was no software, meaning no on-prem installation. And then how do I create a movement around that and then catalyze everybody through this big event? I can think of some, the one that comes to mind is Strava, actually, which is, I don't go on that many runs with other people that I follow on Strava, but I do feel a sense of connectedness when we're all exercising together, and I can see, and Pavilion actually has a Strava group so that I can go through and give kudos to everybody that's exercising. So I think that's probably one. I think that there's probably, to the point of what we were talking about, there's probably a lot of online gaming communities, maybe Twitch, or even YouTube, where people are following specific gamers and then they end up connecting with each other. Fortnite, I don't know if Fortnite's had an in-person big conference. So I can think of them very easily on the B2C side. It's hard for me to think of them on the B2B side. I don't know about you, Alon.
I was actually about to talk about gaming, etc., as an example of a community that is not activated through events. But then I thought about TwitchCon and some of these actually crazy gaming conferences, and I was like, right, that was not a good example. Actually, even that community is brought to life through events.
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing up. I mean, I've been to, and someone mentioned Comic-Con in the chat as well. I go to our local Denver Comic-Con. It's not the one in San Diego, but it still is about bringing those people together. And usually even within those major events are smaller. We're going to get into this a little bit, micro events where there's little panel rooms. So even if you get a very broad, let's say you do go to a gaming conference, but even at that gaming conference, there's going to be here's a Fortnite panel over here, a room, and here's a Minecraft one and things like that, or different, even smaller ways you can kind of segment off that audience. But all of that to say, and I appreciate you bringing up Strava too, because I hadn't thought about that for a while as well, where it's and that even brings up Peloton, where you are all exercising or doing something separately. There is that kind of joint place where you all know you're engaging in the same thing at the same time. But it feels like that still, if you're not really connecting with other people in the room, aside from the focal point of interest, maybe it's not as developed as it would be if there was a gathering intended to make those people connect with each other.
100%. I mean, you can imagine Strava doing some huge annual physical conference with coaches and and we could all go to the mountains in Colorado. I don't know. They could do something really cool.
I wonder if they do. Maybe someone can Google it while we're speaking. That would be interesting.
Maybe they're attending right now and taking notes and saying, hey, this is a great idea. We should do this. And Zoe's saying, let's go. Well, we alluded to this a little bit earlier. Let's move into this next segment. And Sam, you queued this up really nicely earlier because you talked about kind of breaking bread together. And wherever you're watching this right now, this next segment should make you think of your very next meal. And where I'm from, where I'm joining from right now, lunch is just ahead of me. But food is the great unifier for so many reasons and event types. And today's attendees have the appetite, figurative and literal, for gathering together to break bread. So Sam, I want to ask you about a LinkedIn post you put up about a year ago. And two things about that. One is that you declared that you had just hosted your 214th community dinner as the CEO of Pavilion. And also in that post, you provided 14 tips to run a successful thought leadership dinner. What would you say are the top tips? I mean, we might not have time to go over all 14, but top tips out of that list applicable today for hosting a great thought leadership dinner.
I would say the very top tip I have I'll give one strategic one and one more tactical. The strategic one is that structure is necessary in all events. We've all been, and so what do I mean by that? We've all been to a dinner where there's no seating assignment. Everybody sits down wherever. Everybody just starts talking. And these are like B2B events, right? But the host is too sheepish to say anything. You're not even sure if the event has formally started. At some point, everybody walks out. A bunch of people say, that was great, but was it really great? The conversation was completely determined by whoever you happen to sit next to. And so what I would encourage everybody to understand is if you're going to run an event, people want structure. They want to know, what are they supposed to do? What choices are they supposed to make? What are the rules of the road? So structure is critical. And then specifically and tactically, here's what I would say. The biggest differentiator, there are a few differentiators for Pavilion dinners. Our salon dinners are basically our flagship product, so to speak, that we started with. And to the point of structure, first of all, there's a moderator, there's a host. So of course, I hosted all of the first dinners and I set the rules of the road. And those rules of the road were, first of all, no crosstalk. This is the single biggest thing that you can do to make an event actually fun. Turn down the music in the room, right? Because most of the time these restaurants think that they have to create like all of the sound and noise. And what it really makes is the conversation very hard to have. So you turn down the music, you tell the person to turn down the music, and then you say, we're not going to have any crosstalk through appetizers and entrees. What I mean by that is there's one conversation at the table so that the entire table can have a group conversation and it's not 15 different people whispering to themselves. I don't know how about you, but so many times I've been at a dinner table where I've heard something interesting down at the other end of the table, but I can't shift my attention. One conversation at the table makes it feel like one event, and it feels like somebody's providing structure. And then the other thing we would say is give, space for all voices. So the other thing you have to remember is I love the gender that I identify with, but it does tend to be men, that are sort of loud and they talk a lot. They want to hear themselves talk. And so you drown out other voices. And sometimes as the host, you assume that means that the quiet person doesn't want to speak. That's actually not true. Almost in 100% of the experiences I've had, if you just give that person an open introduction and an invitation to speak, they come alive. And so you can orient the discussion around business challenges, and you can say, Joe or Sally or Lisa, hey, what's your challenge? What are you working on? And then all of a sudden they come to life and the group can workshop and answer. So I would say it's really important just to feel inclusive. Everybody is there. And frankly, a lot of introverts attend these events and they have their guard up and they're waiting to be dismissed. They're waiting to feel like they haven't been included. And you want to make an extra effort to make sure that everybody feels very, very included. And then the last thing you do is you say, listen, it's Chatham House rules within these four walls of this dinner, which means everything we say is confidential off the record. Everything that happens here stays here. And that hopefully creates an opportunity for people to feel more open and sharing. And if you do those things, but also you need that moderator, you need the person to say, Joe, thank you so much. But Joe, you've spoken enough now. It's time for us to hear from somebody else. If you can do that in a diplomatic way, then you can really have an exceptional event. So TLDR, structure is critical. And the second thing is no crosstalk, one conversation at the table. That's what creates a really outstanding conversation.
Alon, I'm going to take this to you in a second, but one thing I wanted to point out too, really crucial, and consider this. I have my origin story in social media where it's like, oh my gosh, share everything. But what you're highlighting there is say, no, be in the moment right now. Be in the moment at the table with that discussion. It's not, the priority is not to be on your phone and be like, oh, let me take a selfie of the table and let me just almost live tweet what we're talking about here. You really are trying to make sure everybody is breaking bread together and in that moment together and not trying to diversify their attention at that moment.
Yeah, I would say, Alon and I were on a podcast. My podcast, Top Line, yesterday, comes out this Sunday. Give it a listen. But wherever your podcast can be found. But I will say this: we share a common passion and perspective that presence is at a premium right now. Presence is at a premium. Presence is expensive. Attention is expensive. And one of the things that we have to be thinking about as we create events is that we want to create presence, because our phones are killing us. They're killing our brains. They are making us ADHD. They're blurring us out. We all are having trouble focusing on any one thing. I think in a given Zoom, they say that people are only paying attention like 23% of the time, which is totally insane. So my point is, create these rules, create these structures, because anything that we can all do to create authentic human experience and authentic human presence will set us apart in a world dominated by AI, dominated by digital avatars, dominated by AI that's written the entire marketing copy that nobody's customized. That's all just going to become noise. I was saying in the podcast yesterday, it's starting for me to be possible, and I'm sure many people on the call would agree. When the email response to somebody, that your colleague, when it was written by AI, and you can sort of see, because it's like each sentence references one of the sentences in your email, and then it writes it a certain way. And my point is that we're all going to be craving presence and human connection as a premium experience, And so then it's just up to us to create memorable experiences, which is Alon's passion as well. It can't just be, it has to have structure. It has to have interest. It has to have creativity, taste, and perspective. If you do those things, you can position your brand in a really, really interesting way.
Alon, over to you then. I want to get your insights. Also be able to react to what Sam just mentioned, but also what are your insights as far as the top tips from Sam's LinkedIn post about how to make a successful thought leadership dinner experience?
First, I think the best reaction would be to use the digital claps that you all have, because I'm sure that knowing our audience, I'm sure they all really resonated with Sam talking about kind of presence, being in the moment, and structure, and making sure that the event is not just kind of like a random gathering of people. So yes, feel free. I want to make sure that Sam hears the claps. In addition, I'll say that I believe, and we talked about that on the podcast as well, dinners and large events. This is an area that we, of course, deal with a lot, are on one hand very different because they may have different objectives. But having said that, the principles are actually very, very similar. Our best customers are very intentional about the experience they want to create at their events, and they do that with, of course, a lot of structure. We talked about memorable moments and facilitating deep connections. And I think specifically now, we talked about AI and AI avatars. The good thing about, there are many good things about AI, but one good thing for event professionals is that the importance of events is only on the rise because of it. The importance of actually meeting each other in person, creating those deep connections cannot be replicated with AI. And I think that is one of the reasons that we see the number of events on Bizzabo's platform actually growing 40% compared to 2023. And specifically, the number of smaller events, kind of like field dinner, some of these events that we're talking about right now, are actually growing 60%. So we're only going to see that growing more and more because it provides access to authority and access to decision makers and so on. I also believe that one of the reasons is that the new attendee pyramid of needs. It used to be people come to hear the content, to learn about new things, then to meet people, and then to have a great experience. And now it is truly about having a great experience, meeting the right people, and then consuming content. And these principles are true whether it is a dinner, because I've seen dinners in which you bring some sort of a speaker to that dinner, and people think that if you're going to hear to someone speak for 30 minutes and then just have a dinner, it will be enough. But the other way is actually the right one. You don't need a keynote. You need people to open up following Sam's principles. And that is actually what creates that experience that we want people to leave the room with, in which they feel like they got many tangible takeaways, they became vulnerable, and this is the dinner that they're going to come back to.
Let me ask you both this too. Do you feel like it's an adjustment? Is there a learning curve that event professionals are having today where maybe they're very used to creating almost like a stage presence and yes, a bunch of round tables, people listen and they're not so much interacting with each other. Are they having to make that transition to say, okay, no, I'm not going to have a speaker. I'm going to instead have guided discussions at these multiple tables? How's the learning curve going on there with event professionals?
My experience so far, because we run so many events, is that there is a learning curve, and the learning curve is about the process of, there's just a little bit, even though running a big conference has its own set of, myriad objectives, obstacles, challenges, a million to-do things on the to-do list. The act of getting people to come is still a matter of you put out the link and you ask them to buy the ticket. And that kind of first come, first served approach doesn't work for smaller, more intimate events because the attendee list is so critical. It's critical everywhere, but it's especially critical when there's only going to be 12 people around a table. And if there's only going to be 12 people, and so, for example, Pavilion itself, we run hundreds of dinners every single year. And so we're trying to think about how to build for scale. But we also, and so for a time right now, most of our events are still first come, first serve on a registration basis. But we're moving all of them, all of our dinners to apply to attend in next year, in 2025. Mm-hmm. And that's because, well, there's a certain number of people that have learned how to game the system. And so you start seeing the same faces at every single dinner. And it's that operational inclination of saying, yeah, we're going to have to create more steps in our process because we have to work backwards from an amazing experience for the people attending. We can't just work backwards from what's scalable for us and easy to do. So I do think it's a new set of muscles that are being built by event managers. But Alon, what do you think?
It does require adjustment. When you need to convince your boss to attend an event, some still lean on a fancy speaker to justify their attendance. So content, I assure that content is kind of like the third priority in the pyramid of needs, but it is a needed one. It's not something that you can pass on. Like it is actually the hook to get people into the door. And not only that, not everyone went through that phase of experience first and actually the business impact of experience. Like people tend to think, okay, experience, we're going to all go and drink together. And that's not actually what we mean. It means we're going to form deep connections and we're going to build community. And that will actually drive the business objectives more than me attending a content session that I can then watch on YouTube.
That makes it really interesting too then. And I'm going to get to the next question in this segment in a moment. But I think that does put also a bit of onus upon the event professional to say, so many times we see that, hey, show this to your decision maker to convince them to invest in you going to this event. Alone, to your point, maybe it's not saying, oh, because they're going to hear from this A-list celebrity. Exactly. But instead it's like, here's how they're going to benefit from having discussions with their peers at a round table about topics that are going to make your business better. So it is adjusting that hook, like you said.
We'll be right back with more event experience after the break. Behind every great event organizer is software that makes managing the small stuff easy so you can focus on crafting events that matter. From seamless registration and on-site solutions like the Bizzabox to powerful dashboards and the Click Smart Badge, Bizzabo's Event Experience Operating System is your all-in-one solution to planning conferences that captivate and experiences that elevate. Visit Bizzabo.com. That's Bizzabo.com to learn more. We're back to ask Sam Jacobson about Pavilion's milestone of hosting 1,000 dinners.
Sam, I'm going to take this next question to you, and I have another number for you. 1,000. I guess that's how many dinners you have helped host through Pavilion. My goodness. What did it take to achieve this milestone of 1,000 dinners? And then how did that achievement have an impact on the Pavilion GTM community? It's an amazing number.
Well, and to your point, Rachel, I haven't personally hosted 1,000, but we've enabled 1,000 to be hosted. And so, and I think that speaks to the power of community, which is, a pay it forward, train the trainer mentality, right? So I hosted all of the first ones. And then when we were opening up chapters for the first time in 2018, I went to all of those cities and I hosted the first dinner and I showed the chapter heads, which is sort of our regional leadership teams, which they're all members of Pavilion. They're all ambassadors. Again, a true community, because it's not just me doing all of this, even though obviously I am a public spokesperson for Pavilion. Pavilion, there are thousands of people out there. We've got 50 different chapters. Most of them have 2 chapter heads. So I think there's a total of like 175, including leadership teams, that are community leaders around the world that are doing these events every single day and week. And so what you do is you teach them the format, and you make them such memorable experiences that people tell their friends and people want to come. And I've seen and it's not necessarily that all of the format is ours. There's another, we call them salon dinners, but they're also called Jeffersonian dinners, because ostensibly Thomas Jefferson hosted dinners similar to the ones that we host. So there's other formats. I've been to events where people are the main theme, again, as I mentioned before, is like no crosstalk, is one conversation of, and a shared experience. But I guess the point is what we really try to do is indoctrinate our values throughout the community so that everybody could potentially host a pavilion dinner and have it feel like a pavilion dinner, which maybe makes me think that we should build a course around it. We haven't done that yet, but we do spend a lot of time training our leaders and our ambassadors and our emissaries. Hey, this is how you run the right event. And again, the theme of it, the instinct, I think some people have an instinct not to provide the right level of structure, and then they're a little cautious about moderating the conversation. And what the consequence of that is a few people dominating the microphone. And again, if you're out there and you want to emulate this, feel free to steal all of these ideas. But the most important thing is that everybody at the table feels included and that there's one conversation. And it does require a little bit of humorous shaming sometimes of saying, hey, Rachel, shh. Stop. We're having no crosstalk, and having the courage to say that in a way that isn't antagonistic, but is still open and inclusive, but saying, come on back into the fold.
Yeah. Alon, have you been to any of these dinners too? Because I have a feeling you probably have, but I would imagine, not all 1,000, obviously, but sounds like it's
900 of them. No, actually, I've attended a few and I've partnered on a few as well. So to be a Pavilion partner to these dinners as well. And they do follow the structure. I can tell you that.
That's amazing. And you made me think, Sam, of like, what's that thing where usually it's putting your hand on the shoulder of the person. You're like, okay, you're the one that I need you to be quiet. I need you to stop maybe talking so much, but it's all about learning those moderator cues. And Zoe in the chat says she went to one of those in Austin. So obviously, they're moving through the community itself and around the globe. Well, Alon, I just asked you if you went to a dinner. This actually segues nicely into our next segment. As we are examining the relationship of community with events, this same conversation and this topic is happening around the globe. Everybody's talking about it. What's your point of view in regards to the rise of small regional or micro events over the past 2 years?
I thought about that a lot, kind of like what is actually driving that growth. And I think there are several reasons for it. During the pandemic, people really shifted their budgets from attending third-party events to hosting their own virtual events, because suddenly it was accessible. Like anyone could now run their own virtual event. And running an in-person event was very expensive, so many smaller organizations did not do that. And after you got used to the benefits of it, of owning the audience, owning the data, owning the experience, owning the follow-up, they became addicted to it a little bit. They cannot do that at the same scale, meaning we see that some even small brands on a very limited budget were able to create events to attract a virtual audience of 5,000 people. So they're not able to do that in real life. That requires millions of dollars in budget, but they did see the benefits of hosted versus third party, even on a smaller scale. And so that's kind of like reason number one. And two, I think they just see the ROI. Smaller events definitely drive ROI. Usually, specifically if you do these on the back of an industry conference, when you do those with partners, the investment of bringing 10 to 20 people into a room is not that high. Specifically, if you show the cost, specifically if you have a captive audience that is there for a shared experience and people have the mindset of meeting people, because again, it's on the back of an industry conference. So the ROI is definitely there. And usually when you bring in people from your own team, you suddenly give them an opportunity. And I'm talking about now kind of like not a community-led event, but kind of like a vendor-driven event. Suddenly you give an opportunity to your execs, so to your salespeople or CSMs, to actually sit shoulder to shoulder with their customers and prospects. You really do not need, by the way, I will add that to one of Sam's rule, if it's a vendor-driven dinner, to not talk about your product. And then the best thing that could happen is your customers are speaking about your product on your behalf without you saying anything about it. And the ROI is simply just there. And the third reason is that business travel cost is still really, really high. And that is just, again, going back related to the ROI point, but it's just a very efficient way to meet your customers where they are without waiting for a big travel or a big conference and things of that nature. Specifically at a time in which the economy is still not at what it used to be. CFOs and budgets are still kind of like very tight, etc.
Yeah.
To add on to what Alon just said, I think he made a couple of great points, and one of them is the interplay of the moderator and the vendor can be very effective, and it doesn't require a sales pitch from the vendor or the person that's sponsoring the activity. I think what you do is, as the moderator, you can introduce the vendor and say, we're all here. Bizzabo so generously sponsored this dinner. Hope everybody enjoys. Everybody plants the seed. If you have the right mix of prospects and, customers from the vendor, or at least a few people, then inevitably what happens, exactly to Alon's point, is they feel a sense of obligation. And then they say, I'm a happy Bizzabo customer over here. I'm a happy Well, I'm talking to them right now. I guess I better sign up. And it becomes a point of, positivity, as opposed to, again, treating it transactionally, which, transactionalism, we can talk about this in the next section, but, I think the key point for events and community and brand, I think all of those things are deeply interconnected, and what they require is a long-term focus.
Yeah, great point too. I was going to ask about that too. It's almost like that positive peer pressure of having everyone in the room, and it's like, oh, well, everybody's going to do this and I should do this too. And by the way, we just fed you for free, and it's kind of nice. We made this whole thing for you. So it definitely lends to that environment, which takes me, Sam, to this next question for you. I mean, that's one good outcome you can have and a good result you can have from this. But I mean, you hear from GTM leaders across the globe through your community. You craft experiences for them to cultivate community, knowing how events are people-centric. What are you hearing from those leaders about how community delivers better results and outcomes for them, as opposed to if they didn't have community?
Well, I think it's sort of the point that I really just made. I think the conversation that I'm having over and over these days is the difference between demand generation and brand from a marketing perspective. And I think in a world where demand writ large, meaning global demand in a macro sense, is expanding, meaning your funnel is full without you having to do a lot, then you can focus on demand generation, which is really moving people from the middle of the funnel to become customers. But that is a transactional motion, because what you're trying to do is take existing interest and turn it into revenue. And in that moment, there was a little bit of dismissiveness around CMOs that were brand experts, right? And everybody's looking for like a hacker that can do demand generation. And I think my perspective is, and any true seasoned marketer knows that brand is demand generation. It's just demand generation 3 years from now, 4 years from now, and 5 years from now. And you're making investments that are going to pay dividends over time. And I think it's exactly the same thing with community, which is why community, brand, and events are all so closely intertwined. Because how do you do community wrong? You do community wrong by you get everybody to sign up for free, and then everything that you do is really very obviously a sales pitch for whoever like hosts the community, whatever software company. And that's a surefire way to lose trust and for people to turn off. It's the same thing. There's a lot happening with B2B influencers on LinkedIn right now, and every brand wants to say, can you mention Bizzabo, or can you mention this XYZ technology in the first sentence? And the answer is, well, not if you want people to read the post. Right? So you have to play a much longer game. And the world that we're in right now, where the capital is much more constrained, requires a long-term focus. So if you have a long-term focus on community as a brand investment, then you understand that it will pay dividends over 2, 3, 4, 5 years. And what I'm saying is it's cheaper. It's a cheaper customer acquisition cost. Brand is cheaper than no brand is another way of saying it. As you invest in your brand, because everybody wants to, my peers and my friends at Winning by Design, and we talk a lot about GTM efficiency, which is a big new metric in the ecosystem. GTM efficiency is for every dollar that you spend in sales and marketing, what is the net dollar, meaning including churn and cancellations? What's the net dollar of ARR growth? And that number has been going in the wrong direction. And one of the reasons that it's been gone direction is a macro forces that are constricting demand. But the point is, well, how do you counteract that? Well, you can't fast and cheap do not go hand in hand. At least, it's fast, cheap, or good, pick two. And my perspective is, listen, if you have a long-term focus and if you think your company is going to be around for a couple of years, hopefully, right, then you can invest in community in the same way you invest in brand, which is understanding that over time, the top of the funnel will be replenished over the next 5 years, and it will be a lower customer acquisition cost than if you were just focused on pure demand generation. But if you feel like you don't have that time horizon, you're going to be in a lot of pressure, and community might not be the right way to do it, because what you'll end up doing is building a bad community. It'll be full of transactional messages. The only people that will contribute will be people looking immediately for an answer or trying to sell you something, and it really won't work. And so again, this is why everybody's talking about brand right now. And brand is a moat that you can invest in that delivers cheaper CAC, cheaper customer acquisition costs, but it will deliver it over years, not over the next quarter. And you have to have a long-term vision, which is hard for people in a world that's so uncertain as ours. So that is my soapbox.
Alon, I'll let you react to that before I take my final question of the segment to you. Reactions to that?
At first, I feel like Sam was sitting in our team meeting the other day, because it's definitely a very timely discussion, and it's very challenging to do, because in real life, there's a lot of pressure for pipeline and but what about we're missing pipeline for next month? What can you do? And you cannot say, I will run a dinner.
Right.
And it requires alignment, that people understand that if you only focus on demand capture, it will not be enough down the line. Like, you actually need the marketing team to think very, very far. And I agree 100% that events and dinners are just essential pieces that over time will actually lower CAC and will drive that efficiency. Although now they may be the more expensive line items on your budget, and you do need to have a great go-to-market alignment and CEO alignment that to see the value of these investments that will not have a short-term investment. Sometimes they can, by the way, to help close a deal, but they will have a very meaningful impact down the line. And I think it's great that we're wrapping up the conversation with addressing a business impact, because some people are finding it difficult to draw the line between community dinners and business impact, but it is very much there, and in a very meaningful way.
Well, I have a feeling too, everybody is going to want to take the clip from both of you talking about that just now and take it to their decision makers. You see, this is going to take time and it's worth it. It's not those instant gains, but it's those long-term gains, and it's very much worth it. But it's having that mindset for sure. I'm going to circle back to wrap up this segment, circle back to something we talked about a little bit earlier, was the hook. And this leads to this question. I'm going to ask both of you, and Alon, I'll start with you. What is one thing on a dinner offering, so a thought leadership dinner, what is one thing that would make that thought leadership dinner a must attend, cancel all my plans, and climb every mountain to get to this event? What's something that would just make, I've got to be at this event? What's one thing for you that would make it a must attend?
I'm a foodie and I live in New York City. So to me personally, the name of the restaurant can really help, but in seriousness, it's actually about the people. It's about the people. That's honestly how I prioritize whether I go to a dinner or not. And plus points for addressing the experience in the room. If it's a pavilion-like dinner that I know I'm going to have an opportunity to actually engage versus just eat or speak with the two people who are sitting next to me, it's one thing. If I know that I'm actually going to a 2-hour experience in which I'm actually going to meet 12 to 15 people, that's a different story. But it's definitely about the people and about the experience with those people that will determine whether I'm attending or not.
All right. Well, Sam, how about you?
That's the same. It's the attendee list. It's nice if it's, and by the way, I feel I have taste. I'm probably not a foodie to the same extent Alon does, but I am also deeply impatient. So I'm not trying to spend 5 hours there. We had a salon dinner in Berlin one time, and I was doing a road trip, and the chapter head said it's going to be an 8-course tasting menu. And it was 8 p.m. and then they brought something, and I was like, is this the first course or is this the amuse? They're like, this is just the amuse. I'm like, guys, no, I got to go to bed. So anyway, that's a funny little aside, but the fundamental reality is it's the people in the room. And if you can confirm that it's going to be an incredible group of people, everything else works. And again, if you can provide that structure, I was at a dinner that Alina hosted about a month ago. Alina Vandenberg, the CEO of Chili Piper, and she assembled the co-founder of Apollo and the co-founder of Clay and the CEO of JustWorks, which is, one of the big New York unicorns, and Arena, the CEO of Hootsuite. So to be in that room having like really honest, authentic conversation about the challenges of being CEO, it was steak. The steak was good. Does it matter? Not really. It was the conversation.
Excellent. I would also going to volunteer too. The older I get, the earlier in the day. You just mentioned like 8 p.m. Y'all hadn't really started like any of the courses. I'd be like, yeah, if it's time of day, it better be a darn compelling, group of people
100%.
or food before I'm going to stay awake for that. But that's awesome. All right. Well, I can't believe it, but we're also already getting into our Q&A section. But I first like to thank our two experts, our two speakers, for a super insightful conversation. And I'm sure you have loved it too. All right. First, this is from Lacey Rose with Catalyst. How do you encourage people to network when they may be only focused on the content of the event? Very low participation in networking opportunities provided. So Sam, this might go back to you. Like this might go back to moderator, right? Like how are you making sure that they're still networking, even if they're like, I'm just here to ingest?
Well, it all comes down to, again, moderation and structure. And so, and if you're doing a summit, we have our CEO summit coming up January 22nd, 23rd in New Orleans. And if you look at it's a 1-day event, and there's most of the days taken by networking sessions because we want to create structure. So how do we do that at a summit? One of the things, so you create space, and then when you're on stage as the speaker, you say, all right, we're going to go to group conversation, table conversation. I think one of the interesting ways to think about events is, instead of like B2B events, is think about them as weddings, right? As receptions. So there's assigned tape, again, structures to put people together, and then clarity around the rules of the road. So you might pause and you might say, okay, everybody, there's going to be networking now. And here's the question I want everybody to answer at the table. Here's 3 questions. One of the questions is, how does community fit into your business? All right, everybody take 5 minutes, talk about that question. And so you give them, you got to think about yourself. It's not that you want to infantilize people, but you do have to. We are camp counselors. If we're in events, we're camp counselors, and we're leading, everybody sing the song now, everybody. And then we're all going to march and hold up the flag or whatever we're going to do. You have to treat people like they are children at camp, and just provide clear structure, clear guidelines and rules, and direct and firm clarity, right? Like, no, please do this. You're going to do this now. Thank you so much. So I think if you convey that sense of confidence, that this is how, and I think one of our board members is a community expert, and she talks a lot about how it's okay to have confidence, even if they paid for the ticket, whatever, you can have confidence. This is how we behave at this event. And you can confirm, the guidelines, the norms. This is how we behave. This is what you're supposed to do. And you shouldn't feel defensive about it, because it's the same thing as training, my dog's at the vet right now, so it's top of mind. It's the same thing as training your dog. Like, your dog wants rules. Your dog, we want rules. We don't want to be in violation. We don't want to act like a jerk. So just having the confidence to confirm the rules to the audience, I think, is helpful.
Alon, how about you with that question?
One, Lacey, I think it's a great question. I hope you're still here. And I believe that some people want you to provide networking opportunities without calling them networking opportunities. They think they are there for the content, but I have not met an attendee who is not excited about actually an experience and meeting new people. When you frame it as there are 15-minute networking, I need to click here, I need to do that, you're going to see some people will maybe, I'm not sure if networking is actually for me. So sometimes you need to just think a little bit about, what are those networking opportunities you provided? Can you bake those into the sessions themselves? So in the middle of the content, you're actually doing an activation that allows them to meet the people who are sitting next to you, etc. But show them networking without calling them networking. That's kind of like my tip.
That's a great point.
Yeah, good sneak attack there too. Be like, haha, just insert it right in there, and then they're part of it. Another question that came in, what advice do you have for measuring the success of community building efforts alongside of event performance metrics?
I think it's not rocket science. Again, what you have to understand when you're doing community is it's brand investments. And so the first thing you're looking for is delight, and then revenue will follow much later. So you're looking for net promoters, you're looking for engagement, you're looking for high participation. And if you can do those things, and I think for me, net promoter or CSAT is like a really good way. Obviously, community engagement plus enthusiasm. The thing that's helped Pavilion grow it sounds weird, but we just did an event, by the way, powered by Bizzabo last week. It was our best event that we've ever done. And what's the feeling that we created? We created joy. We created joy. Now, how do you measure that joy? You measure it. Maybe you can measure it. Social media, posts creation. You can measure it on Net Promoter Score, customer satisfaction scores, how many people attended, drop-off rate if it's a virtual event. But I think you have to work backwards from what's the experience that you want to create. And, it's a lesson that I've learned time and time again. If you start with the numbers, with the money, you're always going to end up in the wrong place. If you start from what is the customer experience I want to create, the money will follow inevitably.
If I had to sum it up to a few kind of community-focused metrics, one is community growth, under the assumption that if people get a lot of value, they're going to talk about it with their friends, so we're going to see the community actually growing. Community engagement and participation, as Sam described, how many dinners or how active people are on the digital kind of community. So to actually measure number of dinners they participated and so on. And satisfaction demonstrated by NPS and then retention, like how many people actually stayed for year over year and so on. I think those four, you're golden.
So it does come down to vibes. I love this, that those actually do matter as metrics. So that's an excellent way to wrap up. And unfortunately, that is all the time we have. Thank you, everybody, for your amazing questions and insights. I want to extend again our heartfelt thanks to our distinguished speakers, Alon Alroy, Sam Jacobs. We're grateful for your time and knowledge today.
Thanks again to our speakers, Alon Alroy and Sam Jacobson, for joining us on Event Experience, and thank you for listening. If you're enjoying the show, we'd love to hear it. Connect with us on social and subscribe, rate, and review us wherever you're listening. Also, don't forget to share the show with your colleagues and friends. You can find transcripts of each episode and key takeaways on bizzabo.com/podcast. On behalf of the team, thank you. We'll gather again soon for a new episode of Event Experience.